It's the biggest game in football, with billions watching no matter what. But over the past 100 years, there's been plenty of controversies and drama in these matches. From goals that may or may not have crossed the line, to headbutts and karate kicks, which certainly did cross the line. From dictators to the divine ponytail. From the miracle of Bern to the smash of the Maradona, and even the one World Cup that didn't actually have a final. This is every World Cup final explained. Before the World Cup, the Olympics was the top honor in football, and Uruguay won that in 1924 and 1928. So, as de facto world champions, they hosted the first ever World Cup in Montevideo, but only 13 teams turned up, so the USA actually made the semifinal, where they were pumped 6-1 by Argentina to set up a final between Uruguay and Argentina, the only World Cup final between two Spanish-speaking nations. But before the match, they couldn't decide which ball to use, as they had one ball from England and one ball from Scotland. So they used Argentina's preferred ball in the first half and Uruguay's ball in the second half, creating a literal game of two halves, as even though Uruguay's Pablo Dorado opened the scoring in the 12th minute, Argentina raced to a 2-1 lead at halftime. But in the second half, Uruguay had the advantage of using their favorite ball, so they equalized in the 57th minute and then scored two more goals to win the match 4-2 in front of a home crowd of more than 90,000 fans. So Uruguay's golden generation won football's first ever World Cup and lifted the Gilles Rimet trophy, and Uruguay's manager Alberto Supici, who was only 31 at the time, still holds the record for the youngest coach to win the World Cup. But the crazy thing is that Uruguay were so bitter about only 4 European teams being bothered to turn up for their World Cup that they didn't even bother defending their trophy 4 years later, when the tournament was used by Italy's dictator Benito Mussolini to promote his fascist ideology, and Mussolini even selected the referees for some of the matches, leading to allegations of bribery and corruption. And unsurprisingly, Italy reached the final, where they played Czechoslovakia, who upset Mussolini's script by taking the lead in the 71st minute with a goal by Antonin Puig during a baking hot match where temperatures hit 40 degrees Celsius. But with just 10 minutes to go, Italy equalized and forced the final to go into extra time. 5 minutes into extra time, Angelo Schiavio scored the winner for Italy, who held on for the win. But that won't be the last time that a dictator influences the World Cup. But again in 1938, several South American teams refused to travel to Europe, and Italy were again one of the main contenders in France, with Mussolini sending them a message reading "Win or die." And the dictator's threat seemed to have worked, as Italy reached the final, where they played Hungary, who in their previous 3 games had scored 13 goals and conceded just 1. The final in Paris got off to a wild start, with Italy 2-1 up after 16 minutes, and the Italians got another before halftime and eventually won 4-2. So, head coach Vittorio Pozzo became the only head coach in history to win the World Cup twice, but the World Cup would then take a 12-year break due to the Second World War. And when it returned in 1950, there actually wasn't even a World Cup final, as the format of the World Cup was changed again, and this time the winner would be decided by a second group stage. And after several teams withdrew from the tournament, Uruguay qualified for that second group stage simply by beating a completely useless Bolivia team. But Brazil were massive favorites, and they won their first 2 games of the second group stage by 7-1 against Sweden and 6-1 against Spain. So they had a goal difference of +9 and needed just to draw in their final group stage game against Uruguay to win the World Cup. The local media was so confident of victory that they even published newspapers declaring Brazil the winner before the match, and possibly 200,000 people crammed into the Maracanã Stadium to celebrate Brazil's win in what might be the highest attended football match in history. But Uruguay were determined to spoil the festival, and before the match, they urinated on the newspapers that had declared Brazil's win. In the match itself, Brazil attacked, and just after halftime, they took the lead. But what happened next shocked the world, as Uruguay grew into the game, and in the 66th minute, they equalized. Then, in the 79th minute, Alcides Gija scored to make it 2-1 to Uruguay, and the Maracanã fell silent, utterly stunned by what had just happened. and Uruguay lifted their second World Cup, and the result was such a shock that Brazil decided their white kits were unpatriotic and changed their uniform to the iconic yellow and blue that they wear today. But if 1950 was a shock, 1954 has been described as a miracle, which is strange given that Germany won, but that was because the tournament was dominated by the mighty Magyars, an unstoppable Hungarian team that included the legendary Ferenc Puskás and used innovations like the false nine, deep-lying playmaker, and zonal marking, and they hammered England 7-1 just ahead of the World Cup and didn't even have to qualify, as Poland knew they would be in for a battering, so they just forfeited their game. And then, at the World Cup, Hungary scored 25 goals in 4 games, including smashing West Germany by 8 goals to 3 in the group stage. So, when West Germany faced Hungary again in the final, everyone expected the boys from Budapest to come out on top. But heavy rain in Switzerland suited Germany, who had Adidas boots with special studs to give them an advantage. Despite that, Hungary went 2-0 up inside 8 minutes at the Wankdorf Stadium. But Germany got a goal back on the 10-minute mark, then leveled the scores after 18 minutes, and Germany's goalie made save after save. And with 6 minutes to go, Ottmar Walter scored to give Germany the lead before Puskás had an equalizer controversially ruled offside. West Germany won a World Cup that they know as the Miracle of Bern. But the 1958 World Cup final in Sweden was an absolute goal fest and is still the highest scoring World Cup final ever. Brazil, whose team included legends like Pelé and Garrincha, took on the host Sweden, who also wear yellow, but Brazil refused to wear white as it reminded them of their shock loss to Uruguay in 1950, so they had to buy some blue t-shirts and wear them instead. And Brazil then conceded an early goal, as clearly they weren't used to playing in blue. But the South Americans quickly took control of the game and were 2-1 up at halftime before Pelé scored a superb goal in the second half to make it 3-1, chipping the ball over a defender before smashing it in. And then Brazil went 4-1 up before Sweden got a goal back. But Pelé scored his second of the game to make it 5-2 and finally give Brazil its first World Cup. But the beautiful game certainly didn't come to Chile in 1962, as the World Cup saw 6 players sent off, and the violence on the pitch led to the creation of red and yellow cards. The World Cup almost didn't happen, as the biggest earthquake ever recorded damages Chile's stadiums a few years before, and this was not to be Pelé's World Cup, as he got injured in the group stages. But even without him, Brazil reached the final, and for the first time in a World Cup final, they actually played in yellow. But it was their opponents, Czechoslovakia, who scored first through Josip Masopust in the 15th minute. But Pelé's replacement, Amarildo, equalized right away for Brazil. And then 2 second-half goals from Zito and Vava gave the Brazilians back-to-back World Cups, but there was still more to come from Pelé. Finally, in 1966, football came home as England hosted the World Cup. But the actual trophy got stolen and was found by a man walking his dog. The hosts England reached the final, where they faced arch-enemies West Germany. But it was the Germans who took the lead in the 12th minute before Jeff Hurst equalized right before halftime. England took the lead in the 78th minute before Germany controversially equalized in the 90th minute after a deflected shot, which England thought hit the arm of a German player, wrong-footed goalkeeper Gordon Banks, and left Wolfgang Weber with an open goal. So the game went to extra time, where England dominated, and after 11 minutes, Jeff Hurst smashed the ball in off the bar for his second goal of the match. But for some reason, Germany thought the ball hadn't crossed the line and that the linesman was being biased because he was from the famous English allies, the USSR. Somebody better let James Bond know. But England hung on, and with the last kick of the game, the fans already running onto the pitch to celebrate the game, Hurst scored again to complete the first ever hat-trick in a World Cup final and produce one of the most famous lines in TV commentary.
Some people are on the pitch. They think it's all over. It is now.
And that wasn't the last time that the crossbar would decide the World Cup, but Germany got their revenge 4 years later in Mexico when they eliminated England in the quarterfinals. But the final in Mexico's Azteca Stadium would be contested by Brazil and Italy, and Brazil had an all-star team of Pelé and Jorginho, but one of their stars, Tostão, who almost single-handedly created the false nine position, suffered a major eye injury ahead of the World Cup and needed emergency surgery to save his eyesight. but the final was classic attack versus defense, and it was the attackers who drew first blood as Pelé headed home an opener in the 18th minute, and Italy's rigid defensive system couldn't cope with Brazil's creativity. And as this World Cup was one of the first to be broadcast in color, the yellow shirts of Brazil became symbols of pure footballing skill. Although Italy equalized before halftime, Brazil ran away with the game in the second half with goals from Gerson and Jorginho before one of the best ever goals in a World Cup final by Carlos Alberto as Brazil passed the ball around Italy with almost every Brazilian outfielder getting a touch on the ball before Jorginho crossed to Pelé, who passed it to Carlos Alberto to score. And all this time, Tostão was in tears, crying uncontrollably at the thought of becoming a world champion not long after he thought his career was over. And so Brazil won the match 4-1 and lifted the World Cup for a third time. As a reward, they were given the Gilles Rimet trophy to keep permanently, and a new trophy was made for the 1974 World Cup. But unfortunately, the trophy was stolen 13 years later and never recovered. But still to come are blatant dives, karate kicks, headbutts, and hospitalizations. So write in the comments, what is your favorite World Cup final? But if Brazil played beautiful football in 1970, then that was matched by one of the next World Cup finalists. West Germany hosted the 1974 tournament, which was also the only World Cup to feature East Germany, who actually beat their Western neighbors in the group stage. But it was West Germany who reached the final, where they faced the total football of the Netherlands, where every outfield player could switch positions with another at will, and the Netherlands, led by Johan Cruyff, smashed Argentina and Brazil on their way to the final. In the final in Munich, the Netherlands took an early lead after the referee awarded the first ever penalty in a World Cup final, and Johan Neeskens scored. At this stage in the game, no German player had even touched the ball. But in the 25th minute, the referee gave another penalty, this time to Germany, who equalized and then took the lead through Gerd Müller just before halftime. Germany had good chances to extend their lead, but the match finished 2-1. Meaning the hosts were the first country to lift the new World Cup trophy. Just like in 1934, the 1978 World Cup was overshadowed by dictatorship as Argentina's military junta used the tournament for their own propaganda. One small sign of protest was that the stadium's goalposts had black marks painted on them to symbolize all the people who had been killed or disappeared. Just like in 1934, the dictatorship interfered in the tournament, with Argentina's dictator even entering Peru's dressing room and giving a speech before the match that would decide whether Brazil or Argentina reached the final. Later, some of the Peruvian players said that they had been bribed to lose that game heavily, so Argentina reached the final, where they played the Netherlands under a hostile atmosphere as Argentina deliberately stalled the start of the game to build even more tension. Argentina took the lead in the first half before the Netherlands equalized with less than 10 minutes to go, and the Dutch almost won the game right at the end, but they hit the post and the game went to extra time. With just 5 minutes of extra time remaining, the ball bounced around the Dutch penalty box and somehow ended up in the back of the net, with it not clear whether Argentina's Daniel Bertoni scored or whether it was an own goal. But Argentina won the match 2-1 and won one of the most controversial World Cups ever. But it wouldn't be the last time that Argentina had a controversial win. The group stages of Spain 1982 were even more dodgy as West Germany and Austria played out a 1-0 win to Germany, where neither side tried to score to ensure both sides qualified. But the Germans got their comeuppance in the final against Italy at the legendary Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid, and in goal for Italy was Dino Zoff, who was 40 years old, making him the oldest player ever at a World Cup final. But in the first half, Italy missed a penalty, and the score was 0-0 at halftime. But Italy took the lead on 57 minutes as Golden Boot winner Paolo Rossi headed the ball in, and Italy scored twice more to go 3-0 up. Even though Germany got a goal back, Italy won the match comfortably in the end to lift their third World Cup. The 1986 World Cup was meant to take place in Colombia, but was moved to Mexico, and the hot weather led to the now popular Mexican wave among supporters. But this was the World Cup of Diego Maradona, who scored the infamous Hand of God goal and the so-called goal of the century in the quarterfinal against England, had bagged 5 goals in total in the tournament. So in the final, West Germany's Lothar Matthäus decided to man-mark him for the whole game to stop Argentina's talisman. But Argentina were too good for Germany, and a mistake by the goalie gave them a 1-0 lead at halftime. Jorge Valdano doubled that lead in the second half, but Germany sprung to life and scored in the 74th and 81st minute to equalize. It looked like Germany were back in the game, but then Maradona showed his class and found Jorge Burruchaga, who scored to win the game 3-2 and give Argentina their second World Cup. The two sides were set to meet again 4 years later in Italy, and the 1990 World Cup was generally defensive, low-scoring, and full of fouls and red cards. The final reflected that too, as incredibly, every team in the previous 13 World Cup finals has scored. So, Argentina became the first team not to score in a World Cup final, which is seen as one of the ugliest and most cynical finals to date, with fouls, and more fouls, mainly by Argentina, who already had 4 players suspended for the final for offenses in previous matches. West Germany felt they should have had at least 2 penalties in the first half and several in the second half. In the 65th minute, Argentina's Pedro Monzon dived recklessly into a challenge with Germany's Jürgen Klinsmann, who expertly jumped over the dangerous tackle, but then dived to the ground and flopped on the floor holding his face, so Monzon became the first ever player to be sent off in a World Cup final. It was about to get worse for Argentina, as the referee gave Germany a perhaps fortuitous penalty that Andreas Brehme scored, and then Argentina's Gustavo de Sodi got a second booking for a rash challenge, so he was also sent off. Argentina finished with 9 players as West Germany won the World Cup, but there were even worse fouls to come, including one of football's most iconic fouls ever. Next for the World Cup was a switch from football to soccer, as the world's favorite sport headed to the USA. While the tournament made FIFA a ton of dosh and revived the sport in the USA, the baking hot weather during the final meant the match between Brazil and Italy finished goalless and was the first ever World Cup final to be decided by penalties. Football fans around the world saw just how cruel penalties could be, as Italy's captain smashed the first penalty over the bar and Brazil's first penalty was saved, but the next 4 penalties were all scored, and then Daniele Massaro missed his penalty and Brazil's captain Dunga scored. So it all came down to Roberto Baggio, known as the Divine Ponytail, and Baggio's 5 goals had dragged Italy into the final, and he had probably been the player of the tournament. But with his final kick of the 1994 World Cup, he hammered his penalty over the bar, and Brazil won the World Cup. A cruel end for Italy's talisman, and a reminder that anybody can miss a penalty. 4 years later, it was Brazil's talisman to suffer from a cruel fate, as Ronaldo Nazario, the best Brazilian striker of his generation, scored 4 goals at the 1998 World Cup, where he was the player of the tournament, but he was mysteriously missing from the team sheet for the final. Then, minutes before kickoff, his name was added to the starting lineup, and later it turned out that he had a convulsive fit in the afternoon and was unconscious in hospital, but still decided he wanted to play the match against France. But the final belonged to France's Zinedine Zidane, who opened the scoring with a header after half an hour and got another header just before halftime to give France a 2-0 lead. Midway through the second half, France killed off the game with a goal by Emmanuel Petit, and France celebrated the win, which was seen as a victory for the multiculturalism of the French side of players of black, white, and North African heritage among the team's stars. But for Ronaldo, while he struggled in 1998, he was the star of the show 4 years later. The Korea-Japan World Cup in 2002 is seen as one of the most exciting World Cups and was full of shocks, including underdogs South Korea and Turkey reaching the semi-finals. But the final in Yokohama was played out between Germany and Brazil, and Ronaldo was the star of the tournament and of the final itself, but he was unable to score in the first half despite having several great chances after some classy combination play with Ronaldinho. But in the second half, a shot by Rivaldo was dropped by Germany goalkeeper Oliver Kahn, and Ronaldo scored the rebound. Then, later in the half, a clever dummy by Rivaldo gave Ronaldo another chance, and he scored his second goal of the final and 8th of the tournament as Brazil won 2-0 to win their 5th World Cup. But the next World Cup final was to see possibly the most dramatic ending ever, as France took on Italy in 2006. Before the tournament, France's legendary midfielder Zinedine Zidane said he would retire after the World Cup, meaning that the final would be his last ever match. And he opened the scoring with a penalty kick in the 7th minute after Florent Malouda was fouled in the area, but not long after, Marco Materazzi equalized for Italy, and soon after that, Italy hit the bar, but France dominated the second half but couldn't score. The game went to extra time, where Gianluigi Buffon made one of the best saves of any World Cup final as he tipped a Zidane header over the crossbar. Shortly after this, Materazzi and Zidane had some words, and then suddenly, Zidane headbutted Materazzi, who fell to the ground. The referee had no option but to give Zidane a red card. Shortly after that, the game went to penalties, and Italy were absolutely perfect from the spot, scoring all 5 penalties. But for France, David Trezeguet's penalty hit the underside of the crossbar, so Italy won the World Cup by the finest of margins. As if Trezeguet's shot had been a millimeter lower, he would have scored. By this point, all the great footballing nations had won at least one World Cup, except one. Spain always seemed to choke on football's biggest stage. But in 2010, their Barcelona-esque tiki-taka football was unstoppable, and Spain had won the Euros 2 years earlier, and a series of 1-0 wins finally took them to a World Cup final against a Netherlands side that, rather than total football, seemed to be anti-football, and seemed to take Shakira's World Cup song Waka Waka to heart by taking every opportunity to whack a Spain player off the park, as 8 Netherlands players were booked during the game, including Nigel de Jong, who midway through the first half attempted a kung fu kick right in the chest of Xabi Alonso. But de Jong somehow avoided a red card. These efforts nullified Spain, and the Netherlands had several good chances, but in extra time, all of the Netherlands' dirty play caught up with them as Johnny Aitinga was sent off for a second yellow card, and 5 minutes later, Iniesta scored the only goal of the game, taking advantage of the extra man to finally win the World Cup for Spain. The next World Cup felt like it was Brazil's to lose, as the 5-time champions were hosting the tournament and had one of their strongest squads in years. But in the semi-finals, Brazil probably had their worst, most scarring defeat of all time, getting battered 7-1 by a reinvigorated Germany side that were far more attack-minded than Germany sides of the past. In the final, they faced Argentina and Lionel Messi, one of the greatest players of all time. The question everyone was asking is, can you be considered the GOAT on the same level as Pelé or Maradona if you haven't won the World Cup? But Messi couldn't find the breakthrough for Argentina and even missed a one-on-one, but neither side could find a way through, and for the second final in a row, the score was 0-0 after 90 minutes. But in extra time, Germany finally found a breakthrough as Andre Schürrle crossed the ball to Mario Götze, who chested and volleyed into the net, and Germany became the first European side to win a World Cup in the Americas, as Europe showed its recent dominance of the game, and that was to be even more clear at the 2018 World Cup, where all 4 semi-finalists were European. Everyone loves an underdog story, and in 2018, it was Croatia who inspired teams around the world when they beat England in the semi-finals to reach the final for their first time in their history, where they faced a dominant France side that looked unstoppable, and that showed in Moscow, as even though Croatia started well, France took the lead through the first ever own goal in a World Cup final before Ivan Perisic equalized for Croatia, but a controversial VAR penalty gave France the lead, and in the second half, France did what France does best, hitting Croatia on the counterattack with devastating effect as Paul Pogba and Kylian Mbappe put the game out of sight. While Croatia did get a consolation goal, there was only ever going to be one winner of this final, and France would reach the final again 4 years later in Qatar, where they faced Argentina and Lionel Messi, who had another shot at becoming the GOAT, and Argentina started strongly, with Messi scoring a first-half penalty and then Angel Di Maria adding a second to give the South Americans a commanding lead. France had to make some early substitutions to try to find a way back into the game, but in the 80th minute, the game was turned on its head as Mbappe scored a penalty, and then just seconds later, France hit Argentina on the counterattack and Mbappe volleyed the ball to level the score. This took the game to extra time, where Argentina took the lead again as Messi got his second goal. But then France got another penalty, which Mbappe scored to become only the second player ever to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final. Then, with basically the last kick of the match, Randal Kolo Muani was through one-on-one, but Emiliano Martinez made one of the greatest ever World Cup saves, and the match went to penalties. Martinez's attempts to distract France paid off as he saved a penalty by Kingsley Coman, and then Aurelien Tchouameni shot wide. Gonzalo Montiel scored his penalty to win the World Cup for Argentina, and Messi was presented with a special black robe. But the true GOAT of the final was Martinez, whose goalkeeping antics won Argentina their third World Cup in one of the most exciting finals ever.